Hello, y'all. We left off at The Mind Must Be Nourished. Last time on this Horizons of Hope reading by Margaret M.Gordon. The mind must be nourished. When it came time to send Margaret to school, I was terrified at the prospect. No preschool classes to bridge the way, even a scarcity of small friends to accustom one to the give and take required by life. My copious tears persuaded my parents that little Margaret was not ready, and the big adventure was postponed for another year. Of course, I was no more ready to be shoved into the world at that later date. I could still see the face of the door superintendent of schools, Mr. Fraser. He informed me that if I was going to be such a baby, maybe I had better go home, because we don't want babies around here. I think this was before the days of psychology. However, the educational system was not at all frigid. My first grade teacher was Miss Ada Hester, who was sympathetic to the needs of little people. She etched in memory is still etched in memory is the incident of the stick candy. On a rare occasion I had been given a nickel to buy candy, and it was rare, for those nickels were so very scarce that I had dreaded asking for one to even buy a needed pencil. Perhaps it was to promote my weak-kneed independence that I received this bounty. Albeit I seemed to have acquired 5 lovely sticks of striped candy, and with the candy I suddenly acquired also 5 friends. The seeds of generosity must have been growing in my tiny heart, for as soon as my hands were empty, and also my heart, I had not one lick of candy for me. Miss Hester inquired into my state of despair and soothingly promised that I would have candy tomorrow. When I arrived home the next day with a big bag of candy, a new problem arose. I was unwilling to reveal my tears of the day before. In reply to questioning as to why my teacher gave me candy, I replied, "Oh, I guess she just likes me." The years tell me that the guilt I felt was unjustified. I am sure she did like me. On the first day of school, my father drove me to town. As we approached the schoolhouse, we saw Eleanor Hubbard on her way to school. She was a regular at our church, a few years older than I am. She was kind of heart, perhaps that was all to be said. My father found her presence an easy way to abandon me quickly. There was farm work waiting, and no doubt he was not eager to enter this world into which he was shoving me. I was moving with great reluctance. Eleanor took me to my room. And the body must be nourished. Sorry about that. Like I said before I left, and the body must be nourished. Being a little distance from our town, we took our lunches to school. One of the first things that appalled me was the lack of discipline in the lunchroom. When a teacher's back was turned, those country kids sometimes sent fried egg sandwiches hurtling through the air. My gentle nature recoiled from this use of food. My neat little lunch was carried in a small round pail, such as a sorghum molasses was sold in. It no doubt was 2 peanut butter sandwiches, an apple, 2 cookies, and a little milk carried in a small corked bottle. This was some time before the days of vacuums. One type of cookie remembered specifically was a small round ginger snap. They were sold in cardboard cartons the shape of a barrel. They must have been the least expensive because we ate barrels of them. Sometimes they seemed to be enhanced by spreading butter on them. That was good farm butter, not margarine. The other cookie was a sugar cookie, rolled out and cut. My mother was famous for these. There was a little rabbit, a duck, and a horse cutter. She often was asked to bake these special for bake sales. She thought her secret lay in the fact that she never crowded the cookies on the sheet. They didn't stick together while baking, so each was a perfect shape. However, more than 80 years later, I am sure the recipe itself had merit. I have copied it for friends repeatedly who found it better than their sugar cookie recipe. She used buttermilk and butter. The recipe: 1 cup butter, margarine today, 1½ cups sugar, 2 eggs, half a teaspoon soda dissolved in, half a cup of buttermilk, 4½ cups flour, add more as dough is rolled, 1 teaspoon vanilla, roll and cut, bake at 375 degrees for 10 to 15 minutes. So now y'all just got a family recipe there. Fuck. I should have told y'all that one. This butter and buttermilk was not carried from the corner grocery store. We owned a large barrel churn into which went the cream for making butter. This happened about once a week, probably on Sunday when the children were at home. My brother Raymond and I took turns at this process. 100 turns each until the sound of thumpery thump within indicated that the butter had arrived. The buttermilk was then drained off through a corked hole in the barrel. It was delicious to drink, with rich flecks of butter. No doubt that contributed to my sleek, plump look. Mama removed the huge glob of butter from the churn with a wooden paddle. She had a pound-sized butter mold, hinged so that extra was squeezed out when it was closed. There was a flower design on the inside, which was intended on the top of the pound of butter when the mold was removed. I recall only once that the lid on the churn was not properly secured and the whole mess dumped on the floor. Once was enough. Water. Water, water, water. In my self-arranged world of the imagination, I roam the hills and about the farm. Many times I have recalled the old well at the foot of the hill, surrounded only by loose falling down barbed wire fence. We loved to throw rocks into it and hear the responding splash far below. Through the years I have read traumatic stories of children falling into such abandoned wells. My escape from such misfortune must have been due to obedience to the warnings of a careful mother to never go too close to the edge. As far as for protection from the rattlesnakes, which also roam those hills, the Lord was good to me. The barnyard was situated slightly downhill from the house. There the windmill pumped water for the stock tank. There also was the pump from which we attained our household supply. The sanitation awareness of subsequent years has left question marks over that location. But here I am. Whatever pollution seeped in was apparently absorbed without injury. I did my share of struggling up the slope with a bucket of water and sloshing over the sides. Into the kitchen it went, to sit beside the little washstand. There was a handled gray enameled dipper hanging there, from which everyone drank. A little enameled basin held the water for washing. One scooped water into cupped hands and splashed it over the face. The men always seemed to accomplish this ritual with a sputtering and splashing about. Then The water was dumped into the slop bucket, which also received dishwater, table scraps, and whatever. That bucket, as I recall, grew quite greasy around the edges. Sanitation? When full, it was taken to the back door and dumped into the backyard, washed smooth by such dousings. Here the sun disposed of the germs, and a wandering chicken or perhaps a pig consumed whatever edibles were available. Conservation. Perhaps not at its best, but nevertheless, nothing was wasted. Since water did not flow in and out of the house, there was an automatic restraint in using it thoughtlessly. It came by the bucket uphill. The Saturday night bath was tradition. I don't recall ever being encouraged to bathe through the week. I am sure I would have been hesitant about asking for such an extravagant privilege. This bath was performed in a large round galvanized washtub. In the winter, a corner by the kitchen stove was the place. There must have been an unwritten law that privacy was to be expected during one's ablutions. Ablutions. Okay. Ablutions. I think I do remember an occasional irritated "don't come in here" from an invaded bather. After finishing the body cleansing, it was entirely appropriate to wash out one's undies in the bathwater. If the timing was right, it was then quite desirable to scrub the kitchen floor, which was not linoleum, just rough boards. Then the fourth use of the precious water was to carry it outside and water any growing thing around the house. This use, of course, was only in the summertime. Occupations and recreations. One pastime in the spring was to follow the plow as it cut a deep slice in the rich chocolate earth. Little pink worms wriggled from the freshly exposed earth. After hours of this diversion, a little girl would suffer from leg aches that night. These were called growing pains. I remember only one vacation during my growing up years. At what age this occurred is dim in my mind. We headed west to Easterbrook in the Medicine Bowl National Forest. This was a primitive mountain resort in the area of my Blue Mountain Laramie Peak. The peak was 10,272 feet high and was some 90 miles from Torrington, which was, at the time, a distance to go in an old Ford car. I suppose we stayed a week or so. We slept in a log cabin, and our pillows were stuffed with pine needles, which added to the fragrance of this experience, if not the comfort. There was fishing for the menfolk. Women didn't much interfere with their world in those days. Not sure how we spent our time. I wandered down the pass in the cool of the green forest, the mountain air filled with woodsy aroma. It was fun to visit the general store. Some menfolk from our town, the Eaton brothers, were also there fishing. One day they bought a box of chocolates for us. Gems of kindness are so long remembered. Gems of kindness are so long remembered. In order to have early spring chickens, it was necessary to hatch them in the incubator. This sat in the corner of the living room, since it was too cold to put the baby chickens outdoors. Lacking warm brooders or even a chicken house, a pen was formed along one wall of the long old kitchen. Newspapers were placed on the floor, a fine sand sprinkled in for grit. Papers were changed each day. This made a pleasant chirp-chirp background for the kitchen work and meals. Pleasant, except as mealtime approached for the chicks. Then there was a shrill, frantic yapping arising from the chick pen. This was quickly squelched by the offering of a hard-boiled egg, broken fine in the fingers as it was put in the pen. By the time the little cheepers sprouted wings and a pert little tail, they could be moved to the outdoors. Else they would soon fly out of their nursery pen. The goal was to have friars by the 4th of July. That tender spring meat was a delicacy that has never been duplicated. The fact that a chicken was born to soon die seemed never a fact for mourning. I never had to actually perform a chicken killing. At our place, this was mostly accomplished by positioning the neck on a log and severing the head with one quick, accurate chop of the hatchet. This seemed more merciful than wringing the neck, as some did. The chicken then was released to go for a drunken hop about the yard before it fell. My job was to pick it up and plunge it into a pail of boiling water. This loosened the feathers, which then were plucked in huge handfuls. The naked chicken was then delivered to the kitchen, where my mother cut it into the proper pieces. In those days, there was always a wishbone. The chicken was fried in an old black iron skillet, which gave it a crisp crust, tender and juicy within. "What are you doing for the 4th?" That was a question always asked the latter part of June. There were picnics and other get-togethers to celebrate this day. Flying flags, patriotism, a freezer of homemade ice cream. Whatever else the day featured, there was always an exciting expectancy of more to come. In the evening, the inhabitants of the small town and surrounding countryside gathered at a central location, and there were fireworks. This augmented our small home supply of firecrackers and sparklers. Thanksgiving Day always brings warm memories. At least more than once we went to the elders. They were longtime church friends who had something like 5 children. I am sure there was a bountiful spread of food. Everyone lived in poverty, but food was raised on farms, including meat, so we always ate. My mother furnished cranberry sauce, among other things. For the children, she made little molds, using a play set of miniature glasses of mine. It is remarkable and of significance to note how a small thing leaves an echo sounding in the heart for more than 80 years. Small bits of joy reverberate in a life, also scars of misunderstanding. Which shall it be? Christmas days sadly seem a blank in my mind in the area of home celebration. We never had a Christmas tree until I was grown. I do recall once having a wonderful time at Bloomer's Variety Store, spending the money I was allowed for taking care of the turkeys. When they were sold at Holiday, at least that once, I cashed in on a bit and bought a very small practical presents. I never believed very much in Santa Claus. He never came to our house, only to church on Christmas Eve. We were always there. I suppose I always had a part in the children's program. There were poems to be memorized and recited. Even if one happened to be a shy little girl, there were songs to be sung. I'm little January. Perhaps you do not know how far I've come to greet you across the fields of snow. Perhaps you weren't expecting I'd be so very small. Perhaps you are almost wishing I hadn't come at all. By today's standards, the last thought is a bit negative. They didn't know about those things back then. My encore was, "Here are the beehives Where are the bees? Hidden away where nobody sees. Soon they'll come creeping out of their hives. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Santa Claus always arrived after much speculation and anticipation. Ho, 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 and a sack on his back. A box or bag or sack of candy was given each pupil, and if there was some left over, the grown-ups got theirs too. There were those little round hard candies with the flower designs in the center, and the wavy, crinkly ones in different shapes. Peanuts, maybe one chocolate, perhaps an orange. For those not in the know, there was the guess of who is Santa Claus this year. One winter night, we were plunged into a mammoth blizzard fit neither for man nor beast. I had a part on the program. This was before the day of easy excuses. It was decided that the family as a whole would not brave the elements in the buggy. My father took a well-bundled Margaret on the back of Peanut, a white horse, and I delivered my part. Growth of spirit. The perspective of the years has brought me a state of wonderment as to how anyone ever got the child who became me to perform in public. This was before the days of child psychology. I doubt there were any subtle approaches. I do not recall direct forceful means. It seems to me it must have been accomplished through expectancy. If there was a child's program, children, as a matter of course, would be expected to take part. The WCTU, Women's Christian Temperance Union, was very active in our hometown. About once a year there would be a program presented and the readings were memorized and orated before the assembled group. On one occasion, my reading included excerpts from the hymn, Jesus, Lover of My Soul. Now, at this time, our church did not include hymns in their songbook. We sang from the Psalter, which contained only psalms, pure from the Bible. In fact, my father refused to sing the man-made hymns. When they finally were incorporated, we were United Presbyterians of Scotch descent. At any rate, I was not familiar with this hymn I was to sing. It was arranged that I go to the home of Daisy Deal, a Methodist lady, and practice the hymn. The night of the performance, I got up there and sang the words to a tune of my own composing, and was completely unaware that I had eared until my mother informed me afterwards. Eared, E-R-R-E-D. Must be an old word people don't use no more. Another reading I gave was Mary's Magnificent, found in Luke 1:46-55, which I had memorized. Memorizing portions of Scripture was an important part of school training. Up through the years, many verses have come to mind at needed moments. And I'm sure she's going to talk about this here in a second. She went to apparently a Colorado Young People's Conference, and it goes from, it's Lewis Harris, Margaret McConnell, Dina Moom, and Annaletta Spark here in this picture. I'm sure she's going to talk about that here in a second. So, on one occasion, I had to attend a Presbyterian meeting for young people. These were always held in Colorado, as our congregation was the only one of the United Presbyterian brand in Wyoming. This may have been the national convention, which was held in Estes Park, Colorado in 1930. Each one was assigned some part to cover, and then a Sunday evening in the home church was set aside for these reports from the young people. My assignment was a sermon given by our minister, Reverend James A. Gordon. I took notes. This was before shorthand skills, which never quite replaced longhand accuracy with me. My minister told me the report was so completely accurate that it was almost like the original. Memory recalls such moments of encouragement along the way. On Sabbath afternoons, our minister, in addition to morning and evening sermons to preach, gathered the intermediates together for learning in catechism, youth studies, and learning to pray aloud. This was always accompanied with trepidation on my part. I was afraid of people, and the fear of the Lord somehow did not yet hold the realization that He was my friend. The prayer time would begin and sometimes follow around the group from one to another. If someone failed to do his or hers, there would follow a long, agonizing pause. At times, the minister would finally end this by calling someone by name. I shall never forget that. Margaret, perhaps. That is a gentle reminder that if, even now, I be found neglecting my opportunity to fill in a silence, I might hear my Savior's gentle Margaret. The Lord's Day was always referred to as Sabbath at our house and also at the church. Use of the word Sunday was like putting your foot on heathen territory. It was frowned upon as much as using profane words. It just was not done. There were many things that just were not done on the Sabbath day. One did not even go for a walk unless on the way to church. One did not whistle. Apparently, it was all right to criticize the minister's sermon over the dinner table. Indeed, it was all right to expect that the table be furnished with food from someone's hard-working hand. However, a special sanctity put its blessings on the day. It stood apart as the jewel of all of the other days of the week. There are also Sabbath school experiences that seem to stand out. In the primary area, I sat on a little red chair. I was able to take a picture of one of these many years later. It is in the home of Ruth Gamble in Torrington. She had the foresight to buy one when they were finally no longer used at the church. In fact, she later made one available for me. I cherish it at its presence on the hearth. Along about the 4th grade, Miss Mamie Robertson was my teacher. Hold up. We're gonna change this angle so I can sit back and y'all can still hear me. Along about the 4th grade, Miss Mamie Robertson was my teacher. I visualized myself about that time as a freckled little girl, very tan, in a white dress. One had only one good dress, a hand down or made over. It seems to me that Mrs. Robertson was not a fluent verbalist, but that she did have dedicated love for her class. We had a class song, O Lord my God, with all my heart. Thy wondrous works I will proclaim. I will be glad and give thee thanks, and sing the praise of thy great name. Jehovah will a refuge prove, a refuge strong for all oppressed, a safe retreat where my weary souls in troublesome times may surely rest. The chorus was, I will joy, and sing the praise of thy great name. Later, a dear twinkling lady by the name of Miss Finnegan taught our class. She even had a party for us. Her son Jack became a minister and has specialized in theological findings and through archaeological research. In high school years, George's mother, The minister's wife sponsored the Sabbath evening young people's group. The leader handed out slips of paper with excerpts on the lesson which we had got up and read. George's brother Dave was quite adept in sparkling laughter from the group, which sometimes caused disciplinary problems. And y'all can see there's the class, her 4th grade class that she is talking about right now. Our adopted song for this period was, Lord, through all the generations of the children of our race, in our fears and tribulations, thou hast been our dwelling place. The chorus. On us let the grace and beauty of the Lord of our God remain. Strengthen us for noble duty, that our work be not in vain. Long the clouds of evil lower, bless us now with gladsome days. Let thy servants feel thy power, and their children learn thy praise. Well, we'll get back to this next time I feel like sitting down and reading a chapter with School Delights. Thanks for listening, folks. Have a good day.